Picture this. You're at the beach with your family when suddenly the water starts behaving strangely, pulling back from the shore much farther than you've ever seen. Your kids think it's cool and want to run out to explore. Then you feel it, this deep rumbling sensation through the ground. You suddenly realize everyone around you has about 10 to 20 minutes before a massive wall of water comes crashing inland. Here's what nobody tells you about those critical first minutes. When you feel a strong earthquake near the coast, or when you see that water recession, you have 10 to 30 minutes before the first wave hits. And most people waste those minutes trying to drive to safety, which is literally the worst decision because roads instantly become parking lots. But here's the thing that saves lives. Vertical evacuation beats horizontal evacuation every single time. Instead of trying to drive inland, you need to get to the third floor or higher of a reinforced concrete building immediately without stopping for belongings and without trying to drive anywhere. The 100 rule is absolutely critical for understanding your evacuation strategy. And this is where most people's plans completely fall apart because they don't understand the physics of how tsunamis actually work. If you're on the coast and you feel an earthquake that lasts longer than 20 seconds, or if you see unusual ocean behavior like rapid water recession or strange currents, you need to get at least 100 feet above sea level or at least 2 miles inland, whichever you can reach fastest on foot. And that on foot part is what catches people completely off guard because they're so conditioned to driving everywhere that they can't mentally process abandoning their vehicles, even when those vehicles become death traps. A tsunami wave can travel at 500 miles per hour in deep ocean water, but when it hits shallow coastal areas, it slows to about 20 to 30 miles per hour while growing massively in height. And that slower speed is still way faster than you can run, especially through water that's already flooding the lower ground. Modern reinforced concrete buildings with at least 3 stories can withstand tsunami forces that would destroy wooden structures or single-story buildings. And getting to the 3rd floor or higher puts you above the wave height that kills most people. But you need to understand what makes a building safe, because not every tall structure will protect you from tsunami forces that can exert thousands of pounds per square foot of pressure. Look for buildings with solid concrete construction, minimal ground floor windows, and structural columns that extend all the way through the building, because older buildings or those with large open lobbies at ground level can collapse when the wave hits and removes support from the first floor walls and columns. Hotels near beaches are often built to tsunami-resistant standards specifically because they're in high-risk zones, making them excellent vertical evacuation sites if you can't reach high ground. And this is absolutely critical because climbing stairs takes way less time than trying to drive through panicked traffic, where everyone else is having the exact same idea of getting in their cars and fleeing. If you're in a low-lying coastal area when tsunami warnings occur, you've got to make this calculation instantly based on your location and the terrain around you. And I'm about to give you the exact framework that can save your life and your family's lives in those crucial decision-making seconds. Survey your surroundings right now if you live in or visit coastal areas, and identify the nearest hill, the nearest sturdy multi-story building, and the fastest routes to reach them on foot. Because when an actual emergency happens, you won't have time to figure this out while adrenaline is flooding your system and everyone around you is panicking. Here's something most folks never consider about the immediate aftermath of the first wave, and this knowledge could literally be the difference between surviving the initial impact, only to die in the second or third wave that catches you completely unprepared. Tsunamis come in wave trains, meaning multiple waves separated by anywhere from 5 to 60 minutes, and the first wave is rarely the largest or most destructive. The second and third waves often carry more power because they're riding on top of water that's already flooded inland, and they can reach farther inland and higher up than the first wave did. So even if you survived the initial wave by getting to high ground or upper floors, you absolutely cannot go back down for at least 12 hours and ideally 24 hours after the last wave, because more waves will keep coming, and they'll catch everyone who thinks the danger has passed. Official all-clear signals from emergency management are the only reliable way to know when it's actually safe to return to ground level, and even then you're dealing with massive hazards that the water left behind. But people see the water receding after the first wave and they think it's over, so they rush back down to check on their property or look for family members. And that's when the second wave catches them in the open with no time to reach safety again. The psychological trap here is incredibly powerful because human beings are hardwired to want to protect their property and reunite with loved ones, making it almost impossible to stay put when every instinct is screaming at you to go back down and assess the damage or find people you care about. But you've got to override those instincts with the knowledge that tsunami wave trains continue for many hours, and rescue workers can't help people who put themselves back in danger after surviving the initial waves. If you're separated from family members, the best thing you can do for them is stay safe yourself and trust that they're doing the same thing, because attempting to search for them during ongoing tsunami waves puts everyone at greater risk. Establish rally points and communication plans before emergencies happen, so everyone in your family knows to get to high ground first and worry about reuniting later, because a family that's alive and separated can reunite eventually, while a family that dies trying to reunite immediately can never recover from that decision. Here's what nobody tells you about the water itself, and this information is absolutely critical for understanding why tsunami flooding is completely different from regular flooding and far more dangerous than most people realize. Tsunami water moves with incredible force, carrying debris that turns it into essentially liquid sandpaper mixed with battering rams. Cars, boats, pieces of buildings, trees, propane tanks, and thousands of other objects become projectiles moving at 20 to 30 miles per hour. And getting hit by any of this debris can cause severe injuries or death. Even in relatively shallow water, just 6 inches of fast-moving tsunami water can knock an adult off their feet, while 2 feet of moving water can sweep away vehicles, and 10 feet of water creates forces strong enough to destroy most buildings. The water is also contaminated with sewage, chemicals, fuel, and all kinds of toxic substances from damaged infrastructure and flooded industrial areas, meaning any cuts or wounds you get from debris create serious infection risks that can become life-threatening when medical care isn't readily available. But here's where it gets even more dangerous in ways that catch people completely off guard. Tsunami water doesn't just flow in one direction like a river or regular flood. It flows inland, then it flows back out to sea, creating powerful currents in both directions that trap people in debris fields or sweep them into the ocean where they drown or die from hypothermia. This back and forth motion also causes buildings to collapse from repeated impacts, making structures that survived the initial inflow potentially collapse during the outflow when water drains away from weakened foundations. And if you're in the water, floating debris creates these moving traps, where you can get pinned between heavy objects or tangled in materials like fishing nets, ropes, or electrical wires that make swimming or floating completely impossible. The temperature of the water matters too, because even if you're a strong swimmer, water below 70 degrees Fahrenheit causes hypothermia within hours. And water below 50 degrees can cause loss of consciousness in as little as 30 to 60 minutes, meaning you can survive the initial tsunami impact only to die from cold exposure while waiting for rescue. This is where most people's survival plans completely fall apart because they focus exclusively on escaping the water without thinking about what happens if they can't reach high ground in time and end up in the water despite their best efforts. So, if you absolutely cannot avoid being caught by tsunami water, you need to know these critical techniques that can keep you alive until rescue arrives. First, try to grab onto something sturdy and fixed to the ground, like a tree with deep roots, a telephone pole, or structural elements of buildings, because staying stationary in moving water is way better than being swept along with the current and debris. If you're being swept away, try to get on top of floating debris like a door or large piece of wood that can support your weight, because getting your body out of the water even partially reduces hypothermia risk and makes you more visible to rescuers. Protect your head and vital organs from impacts by assuming a defensive position, with your arms protecting your head and your knees drawn up if possible. And watch for debris coming toward you so you can try to push off from it rather than taking direct impacts. communication in the immediate aftermath becomes absolutely critical for rescue and survival. But this is another area where most people's assumptions about how things work completely fail them during actual emergencies. Cell towers go down almost immediately because they lose power, get damaged by the waves, or become overwhelmed by everyone trying to call at once, meaning your smartphone becomes essentially useless for making calls or sending messages. Text messages have a slightly better chance of getting through than calls because they require less bandwidth and can be queued until brief moments of connectivity occur, but you absolutely cannot count on them working when you need them most. And this is why having alternate communication methods and pre-planned meeting locations becomes the difference between being rescued quickly and being stranded for days with no way to let anyone know you're alive and need help. Here's something that blows my mind about how few people actually prepare for this, despite living in tsunami zones. A waterproof emergency whistle that costs literally $3 and fits on your keychain can save your life when you're trapped in debris or stranded on a roof where rescuers can't see you because sound travels much farther than shouting can sustain and doesn't exhaust you the way yelling for help does. The Fox 40 whistle, for example, is completely waterproof, doesn't have a ball inside that can freeze or jam, and produces 120 decibels of sound that can be heard up to half a mile away in good conditions. Signal mirrors or any shiny reflective surface can catch the attention of rescue helicopters or boats during daylight hours. And this simple visual signaling technique has saved countless lives in maritime emergencies and natural disasters. If you're on a roof or elevated position during daylight, lay out bright-colored clothing or materials in large X patterns because that's the international distress signal that rescue aircraft are trained to recognize immediately. The physical challenges you'll face in the first 24 hours after a tsunami goes way beyond just escaping the water, and most people are completely unprepared for the harsh reality of survival in a completely destroyed environment where normal infrastructure has ceased to exist. Buildings that look intact from the outside might have compromised structural integrity from water damage and impact forces, making them dangerous to enter or shelter in because they can collapse without warning. Power lines are down everywhere, creating electrocution hazards, and gas lines are ruptured, creating explosion risks, meaning the entire disaster zone is filled with invisible threats that can kill you even after the water recedes. Broken glass, nails, sharp metal, and countless other puncture hazards cover every surface, making any movement on foot incredibly dangerous if you don't have proper footwear, which most people don't because they fled in whatever shoes they were wearing, or even barefoot when the tsunami hit. But here's the thing that catches people completely off guard about post-tsunami environments. The water leaves behind this thick layer of mud, debris, and contamination that makes moving around exhausting and dangerous because you can't see what's under the mud, and you can't tell how deep the mud is until you step into it. Every step becomes this energy-draining effort where you're pulling your feet out of sucking mud while trying to avoid stepping on hazards you can't see. And this physical exhaustion compounds rapidly when you're also dealing with shock, possible injuries, and the stress of everything that just happened. Chemical contamination from industrial facilities, gas stations, and agricultural areas creates immediate air quality problems that can cause respiratory issues, chemical burns, or toxic exposure if you're not aware of what to avoid. Sewage contamination means any water you encounter is potentially dangerous, and any food that came into contact with floodwaters is contaminated and unsafe to eat, no matter how hungry you are. Water becomes your absolute first priority in the hours after a tsunami because dehydration can kill you within 3 days, and physical exertion combined with stress accelerates dehydration dramatically. But this is where most people make fatal mistakes because they're desperate for water and they drink whatever they can find without understanding that contaminated water can make you seriously ill or even kill you through cholera, dysentery, or other waterborne diseases that spread rapidly in post-disaster conditions. Here's what you need to know about finding and treating water when normal supplies are completely contaminated or unavailable. First, higher ground almost always has cleaner water sources than low-lying areas that were flooded. So if you can reach streams or springs uphill from the tsunami impact zone, you've got a much better chance of finding water that's relatively clean. Second, rainwater collection becomes your best friend if it rains in the 24 hours after the disaster, because rain that hasn't contacted contaminated surfaces is essentially pure and safe to drink as long as you collect it in clean containers. But let me tell you something that's going to change how you think about water treatment in emergencies. Boiling water for 1 full minute kills all bacteria, viruses, and parasites that cause waterborne illnesses, making even heavily contaminated water safe to drink from a biological standpoint, though it doesn't remove chemical contamination from fuel spills or industrial pollutants. If you have no way to boil water, solar disinfection actually works by filling clear plastic bottles with water and leaving them in direct sunlight for 6 hours, because UV radiation from the sun kills most pathogens that cause illness, though this method only works with clear water and sunny weather. Water purification tablets like Aquatabs or iodine tablets can treat water chemically in 30 to 60 minutes, and they're lightweight and portable, making them ideal for emergency kits. But they also don't remove chemical contamination, and they can make water taste pretty awful. The Sawyer Mini Water Filter weighs just 2 ounces, fits in your pocket, and can filter up to 100,000 gallons of water from any freshwater source, removing 99.999% of bacteria and protozoa, though it doesn't remove viruses or chemicals, making it ideal for natural water sources but less effective for heavily contaminated disaster water. Shelter in those first 24 hours becomes absolutely critical because exposure kills just as surely as drowning does, and most people don't realize how quickly hypothermia or heat exhaustion can become life-threatening when you're wet, stressed, and in a destroyed environment without normal shelter options. Your body loses heat 25 times faster when you're wet than when you're dry, meaning even mild temperatures can cause dangerous hypothermia if you can't get dry and protect yourself from wind and rain. If you're stuck in a tsunami-affected area overnight, finding or creating shelter needs to be your top priority once you're safe from additional waves, because a night of exposure in wet clothes with no protection can seriously compromise your ability to survive the following days. And this is where most people's survival instincts completely fail them because they want to keep searching for family, looking for supplies, or trying to get help, when the most life-saving thing they could do is stop, find shelter, get dry, and rest before their body shuts down from exhaustion and exposure. Here's something most folks never consider about emergency shelter in destroyed environments. Cars that are upright and not flooded can provide excellent shelter from wind and rain even if they're damaged and not drivable, because they're designed to protect occupants from weather, and they offer some security from hazards in the environment. The upper floors of damaged buildings that have been assessed as structurally sound by rescue workers or that show no obvious signs of collapse risk can provide shelter with more space and resources than you'd find trying to build something from scratch. Boats that were carried inland and ended up upright can serve as emergency shelters because they're designed to be waterproof, and they often have built-in storage compartments with survival supplies like flares, emergency food, and first aid equipment. Natural features like caves, rocky overhangs, or dense tree coverage can provide some protection if no man-made structures are available, though you need to be extremely cautious about rock falls or trees that might be damaged and ready to collapse. The psychological impact of surviving a tsunami and dealing with the destroyed environment in those first 24 hours is something that absolutely nobody prepares for, and the mental and emotional challenges can be just as dangerous as the physical ones because they affect your decision-making and your will to keep surviving. Seeing complete destruction of familiar places, knowing that people you know might be dead or missing, and dealing with the trauma of what you just experienced creates this overwhelming psychological burden that can make even strong people shut down or make catastrophically bad decisions. Survivor's guilt hits hard when you're alive and safe, while others around you died, and this guilt can make you take unnecessary risks trying to help when the most responsible thing to do is wait for trained rescue workers who have proper equipment and support. The uncertainty of not knowing what happened to family members or friends creates this desperate need to search for them that can override rational thinking about your own safety, making people venture into dangerous areas or ignore warnings about ongoing hazards. But here's what nobody tells you about maintaining psychological resilience in those first 24 hours when everything feels completely overwhelming and hopeless. Small accomplishments like finding water, creating shelter, or helping someone else in need give your mind something positive to focus on and create a sense of agency when everything else feels completely out of your control. Staying with other survivors and maintaining social connections provides mutual support that dramatically improves everyone's psychological state and survival chances, because humans are social creatures who cope much better with trauma when they're not isolated. Establishing simple routines, even in the midst of chaos, helps your brain maintain some sense of normalcy and control, like doing a morning assessment of your situation, taking regular water breaks, or checking in with nearby survivors at specific times, and accepting that you can't control what happened, but you can control your responses and your preparations for future challenges helps shift your mindset from helpless victim to capable survivor who's taking positive action. Signaling for rescue becomes absolutely critical in the first 24 hours, because the sooner rescuers know where you are and that you need help, the sooner you can get medical attention, supplies, and evacuation to safety. But most people don't understand how rescue operations work in tsunami-affected areas, or what makes someone easy versus difficult to locate and help. And this lack of knowledge means they miss opportunities to improve their chances of being found quickly. Rescue operations typically start with aerial surveys using helicopters and drones to locate survivors and assess damage, followed by ground teams working systematically through affected areas. And they prioritize cases based on medical urgency and accessibility. Being visible from the air dramatically increases your chances of early rescue, while being hidden inside damaged buildings or in low-lying areas covered with debris makes you much harder to find. And this is why understanding signaling techniques and staying in open, elevated locations when possible becomes so important in the hours after a tsunami. Here's something that blows my mind about how few people know these basic signaling techniques that rescue workers are trained to recognize immediately. Large ground markers using any bright-colored materials arranged in geometric shapes or letters catch the attention of aerial searchers, and spelling out SOS or help in letters at least 6 feet tall makes your message unmistakable. 3 of anything in a triangle pattern is the international distress signal, whether it's 3 fires, 3 piles of debris, 3 whistle blasts, or 3 flashes of light, and rescue workers are specifically trained to recognize this pattern. Smoke from a fire creates a visible signal during daylight hours that can be seen for miles, and you can make the smoke darker and more visible by adding green vegetation or rubber to the fire. Though obviously you need to be extremely careful about fire safety in an environment filled with fuel and flammable debris. At night, any light source becomes incredibly valuable for signaling because it contrasts sharply with the darkness and catches attention, whether it's a flashlight, a fire, or even just a smartphone screen that you flash in patterns toward any aircraft you hear.